This video is completely about the vocabulary words and identifying them to get a level 2. Oh, I have it written right there, level 2. Amplitude is how high and how low your graph goes from the midline. That's how you identify the amplitude. The frequency is the number of times in 360 degrees that you go through a full cycle. So for example, this one, that is 1 full cycle. That is 2 full cycles. So if that is a range of 360 degrees, then the frequency would be 2. Midline is just where that middle of the graph happens. And then I kind of jumped over the one period here. It's based on the frequency. It's just how long it is between going through one whole cycle or before your graph repeats. So let's practice this a couple of times. Identify the amplitude, period, frequency, midline for each graph. So starting with amplitude. Amplitude is how far from the midline to the top or from the midline to the bottom. Either way. So we have 2 because there's 1, 2. I should not have that on there. The period is how often, so like the cycle goes up, the cycle comes down, and then at that point we're repeating. I feel like I need to change my color here. So there's the beginning of the cycle. It goes up, it comes down, and we're done. Problem is, I went all over my little thing there. Looks like it says 2 pi. So we cycle through once with our graph in 2 pi, which means our frequency, how often did we cycle through in 2 pi, is 1. And midline, it's kind of the one I always start with actually. Where was the middle of our graph? I'm going to erase all this nonsense. The middle of our graph there was right at 0. So we're going to practice this again just a bunch of times. If at some point in time you feel comfortable to do it on your own, please do so. Amplitude, period, frequency, and honestly, I always start with midline just because to get amplitude, you need to know where the middle of your graph is anyway. So in this case, the midline, I think that's a 2, because that looks like a 4 up there. So I'm going to say our midline is at 1. And if our graph goes up to 4 and our midline is at 1, that puts an amplitude of 3 in between there. Now for our period, how often until it repeats? Well, looks like about that far. And again, that's 2 pi. So our period is going to be 2 pi. How often did it go? Again, it just went through one cycle in 2 pi. I promise we'll have some that don't. For example, this next one. Let's go through those same vocabulary words. Okay. Again, I typically start with midline, and it's just kind of an eyeball. Where would be the middle of this graph? The midline is happening at 1, and I go all the way up to 3. So the difference between there, I have an amplitude of 2. Again, period, how long until I start repeating? So there's 1 full cycle. Looks like that happened at pi. So then how many of those do we go through until we get to 2 pi? In this case, it would be 2. Please pause the video at this point and try this next one on your own. Again, remember, I typically start with midline. I'm not saying you have to. That's just a piece of advice. Start with midline, get this one on your own, and here come the answers. The midline is 1, which means the amplitude is also 1. The period, I have 1 cycle. This one happens to be pi. So how many times did I go through by the time I got to 2 pi? Well, there's 1, there's 2, so 2. Here are the last 2 examples for this level 2 work. Please pause the video at this time and get those 4 vocabulary words: amplitude, midline, period, and frequency. The answers will be posted in 3, 2, pause the video please, 1. To get the period here, I drew it in 3 different colors. So how many times did it happen in 2 pi? The frequency was 3. So where's the period? It's kind of in the middle there. All you got to do is take 2 pi, because that's our total, and we divided it by 3 because we had 3 cycles. So you can take your frequency and just do 2 pi divided by that. So our period is 2/3 of a pi. And then this last one, here are the solutions. Well, shoot, that one was an easier one because our period again was 2 pi. So our frequency was 1. Let me know if you have any questions. There's some practice problems available for you.